All right, let's talk about a massive economic story unfolding in India. We're diving into a complete overhaul of its tax system, something called GST 2.0. It's this really bold plan with a fascinating goal. And believe me, it affects everything from your grocery bill all the way up to the national debt.
And that brings us to the central puzzle, the thing that sounds almost impossible. How can a government slash taxes for millions of people and businesses while at the same time trying to get its national debt under control? I mean, usually it's one or the other, right? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack.
So here's how we'll tackle it. First, we'll look at the big fiscal picture, the strategy behind all of this. Then, we'll get into the great GST overhaul itself. After that, we'll see how it actually impacts everyday wallets and entire industries. And finally, we'll solve that big revenue puzzle. Okay, so before we can even get to GST 2.0, we have to zoom out a little. This wasn't some random decision made in a vacuum. It was a core part of a much larger national strategy, a philosophy the government actually calls credible consolidation. So, what on earth is credible consolidation? Well, think of it like a very careful balancing act. The main goal is to shrink the national deficit, that gap between what the government spends and what it earns. But, and this is the key part, they wanted to do it without slamming the brakes on the economy. So instead of just cutting spending across the board, the strategy was to invest smartly in things that fuel future growth. And look, this isn't just talk. The government has set a very public glide path, which is basically a clear public target to get that fiscal deficit down to 4.4% of GDP by 2026. It's a way of signaling to the whole world, hey, we're serious about our fiscal discipline. And you can already see the results. It's pretty remarkable, actually. While a lot of major economies saw their debt levels explode after the pandemic, India has managed to cut its debt-to-GDP ratio by 7.1 percentage points since 2020. That is a huge shift in the right direction. This slide right here perfectly illustrates how they're doing it. The government is literally changing the quality of its spending. So on the left, you've got revenue expenditure. That's the day-to-day running costs like salaries and subsidies. You can see that's taking up a smaller and smaller piece of the economic pie. But then look at the right, capital expenditure. That's investment in long-term assets, things like roads, ports, and digital networks. That has tripled in just 5 years. So they're spending less on just running the house and way more on building a bigger one. All right, and that brings us to the star of the show, the great GST overhaul. Now, as we've seen, this wasn't just some tweak to the tax code. It was the crucial third piece of a much larger, very deliberate plan. The sources we're looking at call this a tripod of tax reforms, which is a pretty great way to think about it. The first leg, back in 2019, was cutting corporate taxes to give businesses a boost. The second leg, set for 2025, was reforming personal income tax to put more money in people's pockets. And the third leg, the one holding it all steady, that was GST 2.0. You see, it was a clear, step-by-step strategy to build a simpler, more growth-friendly tax system. And what's really key here is the radical simplification. The old, incredibly confusing system with all its different rates and rules was just thrown out. In its place, you get this clean 3-tier structure. A low 5% merit rate for essentials like medicine and renewable energy devices, a standard 18% for most other goods like cars and appliances, and then a higher 40% demerit rate for select sin goods. The goal was so simple: make the system predictable and a whole lot harder to cheat. Okay, so that's the high-level policy. But what does all this actually mean in the real world? Let's connect these abstract ideas to the price tags you see in shops and the big decisions that businesses have to make every day. Now, this is where it gets really real for people. Just look at the direct price relief for households. Everyday things like soap and toothpaste, they went from a tax rate of 12 or even 18% all the way down to just 5%. Some essentials like UHT milk and certain life-saving drugs went down to 0%. And even big-ticket items like small cars and motorcycles saw their tax rate plummet from a pretty hefty 28% down to a much more manageable 18%. That's real money back in people's pockets. But here's the thing. These weren't just random discounts. No way. Each one of these cuts was a strategic tool to achieve a bigger goal. For example, lowering taxes on manufacturing inputs. That was designed to directly boost the Make in India program. Slashing the tax on solar panels from 12% to 5%. That was all about hitting climate action goals by making green technology cheaper for everyone. And those lower rates on cars and appliances? Well, that was a direct injection of fuel to get consumers spending again.
And this brings us to our final section, right back to that central paradox we started with. How in the world do you cut tax rates across the board and not absolutely destroy your government's revenue, especially when you're also trying to lower your debt?
I mean, it's the obvious question, isn't it? It just feels completely counterintuitive. If you lower the price of something, you expect to make less money from it. Simple as that. But that is not what happened here. The answer is right here on this chart, and it's pretty stunning. Despite all those rate cuts, GST collections actually hit new all-time highs again and again. This is the magic of what economists call volume over rate. The idea is that when the system is simpler and the tax burden is lower, it becomes way easier and more attractive for businesses to just comply and pay what they owe. This boosts the whole economy, which means the government ends up taking a smaller slice of a much, much bigger pie.
And if you want hard proof of that expanding pie, look no further than this number. Since 2017, the number of businesses registered for GST has exploded, going from about 6 million to over 15 million today. By making the system simpler and fairer, millions of businesses were brought into the formal economy. That dramatically widened the tax base, making government revenues far more stable and resilient. But the journey isn't over, and this quote really points to what's next on the horizon. The focus is now shifting from a mindset of enforcement and control to one of facilitation. It's a huge move away from just policing businesses and towards a system built on trust, one that's designed to make it as easy as possible for people to do the right thing.
So you see, GST 2.0 was never just a simple tax tweak. It really signals a fundamental shift in the philosophy of how to run a modern economy. And it leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. What does it truly signal when a country's entire economic strategy starts moving away from just control and collection and towards trust and facilitation? It's a fascinating experiment, and one we'll be watching for years to come. Thanks for joining me.